Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are wrestling with a truly enormous collection of sources. We've got articles, research, personal accounts, all dedicated to dissecting the foundations and practice of global mission.
Hmm.
And this isn't just about good intentions. It's a really rigorous analysis of the essential theological groundwork, the strategic methodologies, and the deep cultural dynamics that you need for truly effective cross-cultural work today.
Yeah.
So our mission really is to distill this complex field into a clear, navigable map for you.
It is a profound set of documents. And, what struck me immediately was just how well the material manages to be. I think one source put it perfectly. It's extraordinarily accessible, yet never dumbed down.
That's a hard line to walk.
It is. It blends this really deep historical and theological analysis with these just raw, practical insights that you can only get from, decades in the field. We're
Wow.
bridging the gap between profound conviction and the sort of nuts and bolts of actually building something that lasts.
And right out of the gate, the sources challenge a common misconception, this idea that deep strategy is somehow unspiritual.
Oh, absolutely.
We're immediately introduced to the necessity of what they call missional strategizing.
Precisely. And if we look at the Apostle Paul, particularly in 1 Corinthians,
Yeah.
he describes himself not as, a wanderer or an improviser. He calls himself a deliberate and careful
An
builder.
expert architect.
An expert architect, exactly. He wasn't just preaching. He was strategic about where he built and how he built and even what materials he used. And this really pushes back against any notion that strategy is some modern corporate invention. For Paul, it was foundational to his ministry.
So if strategy is foundational, we have to look at the theological pillars that underpin it. Let's start with the first one, the concept of Missio Dei. We can probably assume our listener knows the basic definition, so let's jump right to the implications.
Yep.
If mission is truly God's, not humanity's, what is the single biggest operational mistake that realization prevents?
Well, it prevents self-glorification and, frankly, burnout. Missio Dei, the mission of God. It's the prior and larger reality of what God is already doing.
Right. It's not our invention.
Not our invention and not our sole responsibility.
Yeah.
So when people understand themselves as participants in God's sovereignty, they operate under divine energy, not their own, limited capacity. And that realization is what sustains immense personal cost.
And we see that cost so dramatically illustrated in one powerful anecdote.
Oh, yes. The sources mention these early missionaries who were so aware of the physical toll and the disease risk, especially in parts of Africa, that they famously packed their earthly belongings in caskets. In caskets.
Yeah.
They were acknowledging from the moment they left that their life expectancy would be severely affected.
Uh-huh.
That level of sacrifice is only sustained when you truly understand the mission belongs to God, and your life is just a disposable resource for His ultimate purpose.
That is just a staggering commitment. Let's move to the second pillar, the kingdom of God. Now, this isn't separate from Missio Dei. They converge.
They absolutely connect, because the God who calls and sends is the God who reigns. Kingdom theology is rooted right in the creation narrative. God rules because He created us. But the most foundational definition, the one that really defines our mission, it's right there in the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
So the kingdom is simply God's will being done.
That's it. If your strategy isn't aimed at achieving that, God's will being realized in a specific place, then you're likely pursuing your own program, not His mission.
Which brings us to the third indispensable pillar, the incarnation or redemptive identification. We know the ultimate expression is Jesus, right? Emmanuel, God with us. But the sources talk about a continuing incarnation.
Yes, the continuing incarnation. It's the command for those involved in this work to similarly incarnate the gospel.
Right.
John 1.14 says, the Word became flesh and pitched His tent. He moved into the neighborhood. He made His dwelling among us.
He didn't extract people to a distant, safe...
The safe compound? No.
Mm-hmm.
He came to them.
Here's my challenge, though. Isn't it asking a bit much of an ordinary person to fully embody that? I mean, incarnation literally required the divine to become human. So how do mere humans incarnate a message without losing their identity or, falling into pretense?
That's a crucial distinction. It's not about losing your identity, but it is about sacrificing your cultural comfort and your privilege.
Bro.
It requires what Paul modeled when he became all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some.
Okay.
The requirement is identification through empathy, and that demands the cruciform life, the willingness to die to your own preferences. I mean, the divine order is clear. Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a single seed. Identification precedes fruitfulness.
So if the incarnation demands we shed our cultural skin and commit to that kind of sacrifice, how does that translate into the actual logistics and daily life of the missionary? This shifts us right into our second segment, cultural realities.
Absolutely. The faith has never grown by just staying put. Historically, its survival and its growth have always been tied to cross-cultural transmission. It's inherently a mobile faith that demands adaptation.
And this demands we contrast incarnational ministry with the deeply flawed extractional model.
Right. Incarnational ministry is rooted in empathetic, redemptive identification. It's about building relationships that are genuine enough to transform the heart, the mind, the soul, all while respecting and identifying with the local culture.
While the danger is the extractional approach, we know the key indicators: failing to perceive cultural differences and then superimposing the sending culture's perspectives.
And, the most famous signpost of this failure is probably the reliance on the mission compound.
Oh, absolutely, a classic image.
Right. You picture the missionary living in this Western-style house, often physically separated by a fence, and all the meaningful contact happens only on their terms, inside that enclosure. This creates dependency. It says, come to our world to receive God's message, rather than, we're coming to your world to share God's message.
And the engine driving that kind of thinking is ethnocentrism. It's cultural pride. It's not just saying, my culture is better than yours. It's equating your own cultural perceptions of reality with reality itself.
Exactly. It's the arrogance of the monoculturalist who assumes their way of communicating
That's
is
universal. Right.
And that arrogance gets shattered by these small, often humorous, but really significant cultural slips.
Mm-hmm.
Take nonverbal communication in Africa. A Westerner sees two men holding hands, they might jump to a quick ethnocentric conclusion about sexual identity.
Sure.
But in many African cultures, it just signifies deep friendship or a confidential exchange.
Or the linguistic pitfalls. I was struck by the source that mentioned the Kipsigis language, where if you pronounce the English word anyone, like anyone, you're actually saying, I am coming.
Yeah.
The message is just completely lost simply because of a slight phonetic misunderstanding.
And these slips, they highlight this enormous gap in worldviews. We have to grasp that culture impacts the reception of the message fundamentally. American culture is generally naturalistic. It separates the natural from the supernatural. It's individualistic. It's linear.
While conversely, African culture is often deeply spiritualistic. All of life is pervaded by spiritual power: illness, failure, tragedy. These are concerns caused by spiritual forces. It's group-oriented and often past-oriented.
This is so critical, and it leads us to a concept one source labeled the excluded middle. Western theology, shaped by the Enlightenment, it often successfully addresses the highest level ultimate reality, God, eternity, and the lowest level, which is scientific pragmatism like medicine and technology. But it leaves this vacuum in the middle.
Okay, what exactly is that middle level?
It's the realm of supernatural, but this worldly forces. It's where people ask, who caused this drought? Why did my child get sick? Who can guarantee my future safety? Folk religions and traditional spiritual practices thrive here because they provide answers for these immediate daily crises.
So if cross-cultural workers only talk about ultimate salvation and scientific remedies, they're completely unprepared to speak effectively to the folk religion that governs everyday fear and tragedy.
Exactly. Relevance through identification.
So if you want your strategic outreach to resonate, you can't just operate on the highest theological level or the lowest scientific level. You have to step into that excluded middle and address their everyday spiritual anxieties with a kingdom perspective. That provides immediate relevance.
That's it.
Now that we have the theological foundation and the cultural mandates, let's pivot to the logistics, the structure of the work itself. We're moving into the missionary cycle, this necessary structure for workers facing constant transitions, from pre-departure all the way through re-entry.
And this cycle is often overlooked, but managing these transitions is really key to longevity. That initial pre-departure stage is incredibly stressful. Candidates face these genuine existential questions from family and friends. Is it fair to take a baby to Africa? That fear forces a deep internal audit of their call before they even leave.
Then comes the learning period. A really crucial insight from the sources is that evangelism is not set aside during language learning.
Right. Even with communication limitations, practicing Christ-like behavior and simple outreach is core to their identity as they immerse themselves.
And this leads to the growth period. This is where the worker's role shifts dramatically, moving from learner to evangelist, church planter, nurturer, and trainer.
And the focus sharpens to a three-part task. evangelism and planting, nurturing the emerging community, and crucially, training local leaders.
And the ultimate success, strategically, is phase out. This is achieved when the movement is self-sustaining and the foreign worker can step back. And we saw this with the Kipsigas church planting movement, right? Which was thriving. 10 independent churches, 12 years after the missionary departure.
All led entirely by native vocational preachers and farmers. That shows true strategic success.
And that kind of robust growth only happens with intentional nurturing and discipleship. The sources use this excellent transformation metaphor to describe this. Caterpillars are consumers, entirely self-absorbed. Pupas represent the transition, focusing intensely on personal growth and training. But the ultimate goal is the butterfly, stretching beyond the cocoon to spread God's pollen, focusing outward.
And for leaders, that transformation follows a very specific sequence. Information, which is followed by imitation, which then leads to innovation. Why is that sequence so non-negotiable?
That's a great question.
Well, because information alone just creates scholars, and imitation alone creates dependents.
Right.
Innovation is the vital step. It's when the local leader takes the information they've learned, the model they've imitated, and then applies it creatively and effectively within their own cultural context without foreign guidance. This is why models like theological education by extension are so important.
And that delivers seminary-level content without having to leave their context.
Exactly. Or the apprenticeship style of obedience-oriented education, which is experiential and action-based rather than solely academic. It forces them to put what they learn into practice immediately.
But training leaders requires resources, which brings us to the very thorny issue of missions funding. The sources contrast three key models. The first, the personal support model, is easy for rich nations, but dangerous because it creates dependency. It's like installing scaffolding that eventually becomes the structural support for the fragile building, meaning you can never remove it.
Right. This dependency just hinders true maturity. The indigenous model, on the other hand, it demands that churches be self-supporting from the very beginning.
So what is the great strategic advantage of forcing that indigenous support?
It fosters immediate maturity, and it prevents financial inducements. I mean, if a local worker knows their livelihood depends on foreign funds, it introduces a potential corruption risk and can warp the motivation for leadership. The indigenous model forces the local church to recognize the resources God has placed in their own community from day one.
And then there's the partnership model. This seems to be the careful middle ground.
It is. It's the most appropriate use of foreign funds, where the goal is to empower local leaders, not control them. It uses external resources as a temporary catalyst for growth, but requires shared governance and shared responsibility.
Okay, so it accelerates the local strategy rather than replacing it.
Precisely.
Finally, we have to address short-term missions, or STMs, defined as any mission trip under 2 years. The sources provide a really balanced view, acknowledging significant benefits and considerable challenges.
The benefits are real. They are fantastic spiritual formation exercises. They can model simple outreach effectively, and they are a massive recruiting tool. Up to 16% of STM participants later enter long-term service. They're the feeder system for the long-term work.
But the sources warn extensively about the unintended negative effects. STMs can create economic dependencies, especially when short-term workers perform manual labor that unemployed locals could be paid to do.
And crucially, there is the devastating risk of unintentional deception. In some cultures, where direct refusal is considered rude, a gentle North American maybe or I'll try to come back next year is heard as an affirmative promise.
A definite yes.
A definite yes. And when that promise isn't fulfilled, it breeds deep distrust and undercuts the credibility of the long-term workers who have to stay and deal with the fallout.
So the guiding principle for STMs must be paramount. They have to be viewed as a spiritual exercise for the participants first, and they must cooperate directly with the local leader's long-term strategy.
Yes, they can never be isolated from or competing with the established work.
You know, we have come full circle, grounding our strategy back in theology. We began with the pillars, Missio Dei, the kingdom, and incarnation, and found that these three themes form the indispensable guidance system for all effective strategy.
Whether we're talking about cross-cultural communication or missions funding models, it all comes back to that.
It's a profound realization that the theological demands are identical to the strategic demands. The ultimate call is to redemptive identification.
And that realization, I think, leads to the ultimate challenge for you, the listener. The sources describe the church itself as the continuation of the incarnation. If the body cannot survive without blood, The church cannot survive without mission.
This deep dive really shows that mission isn't something external that we just observe. It's an identity we embody. It's not just about receiving, but about becoming a community builder, modeling the distinctive life of God's people in a world that is so fragmented and searching.
So consider this. Your ultimate mission is to invite searchers into your life through gracious hospitality and kingdom witness, so they can truly come and see what it looks like when God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven. That invitation to see God's will manifest right where you are is the final and most powerful strategy of all.